Secretary of State Hillary Clinton returned this morning from a trip to the Middle East, a trip which had a rocky start, a rocky end, and a pretty rocky in-between, too. The whole thing got started a day late when Secretary Clinton's travel was delayed because her husband needed 2 stents in his coronary artery. After that, off to Qatar, where on Sunday, Secretary Clinton met with the Turkish Prime Minister. According to late reports, that meeting was supposed to last about 20 minutes. After roughly an hour, the U.S. Ambassador, Joseph LeBaron, decided to intervene, telling the Turkish delegation that Madam Secretary had to leave with an important meeting with the Emir of Qatar. That apparently was taken by the Turks to be the wrong thing to say. According to an English-language report from the Turkish news outlet Sabah, the foreign policy advisor to the Turkish Prime Minister yelled at the American ambassador, "You are not the one to decide how important we are. You cannot insult my country." And according to this report, the two grabbed each other by the neck, and the American ended up kicking the door in frustration. That's what the breathless Turkish press says. Now, P.J. Crowley from the United States State Department was an eyewitness to the altercation, and this was his version of it. Here's what he told our producers today. He said, "The report you got was a little too dramatic. What did happen was they were discussing the urgency of making sure the secretary knew the emir was waiting for her. Ambassador LeBaron did bang on the door. I think he was pushed away from the door and escorted downstairs. Shortly thereafter, the meeting ended. It all worked out in the end. It was a very sharp exchange of words in Turkish, but it was a flash, and then it got resolved quickly." That was not the only strange thing that has happened on this trip. The day after the fight at the door with the Turkish guy, Secretary Clinton met with King Abdullah in Saudi Arabia. As soon as the two sat down for a lunch of lamb and rice, it is reported that King Abdullah grabbed a remote control and turned on a big flat-screen TV that was in the lunch tent with them. Big flat-screen TV, he turned the volume all the way up. The TV was showing a soccer match, punctuated by news reports on the secretary's visit. Now, one consequence of having the TV going at full blast was that reporters nearby couldn't hear a word of what the king and the secretary said to each other, which is the single most polite explanation for why he did that. At this point in the trip, we're up to Tuesday, and the secretary is ready to fly back home to D.C., but the weirdness of this trip is not over. A fuel valve on her giant plane goes kaput. Secretary Clinton has to hang out at the Jeddah airport for 5 hours while anxious staffers scramble to come up with a solution. Wouldn't you know, who's in the neighborhood but General David Petraeus? So General Petraeus swung by on his giant plane after a meeting somewhere and brought Secretary Clinton back to Washington in his plane. But because Secretary Clinton outranks David Petraeus, that means that as soon as she stepped aboard his plane, it technically became her plane, which is probably the single most awesome thing about being Secretary of State.